everyone. My name's Elena.
My name's Ian.
And we are here to talk to you about the voice. So let me tell you a little bit about why I'm making this first. This is the first 5-minute Singer podcast, videocast. It might be the last. We will see. But basically, I just made this video course that lays out all the different body parts that play a prominent role in the voice, isolates them, and kind of shows you how to develop better vocal habits with those body parts one at a time so you can have a better singing experience automatically without having to focus on all of those individual parts when you're actually in performance. So kind of isolating things and doing them over time instead of trying to control everything all at once and getting confused, because that happens to a lot of singers. It certainly happened to me. Has it happened to you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. So in order to kind of do a little bit of promotion for that, I jumped on the singing subreddit, that's r/singing on Reddit, and asked a bunch of people, hey, what are your questions about singing? I'm thinking about writing some blog posts. And I ended up with an avalanche of amazing responses. I can't possibly write that many blog posts. So I invited my friend Ian on here to kind of tackle some of them today. A little bit about us so you know why you should listen to us or decide that we're not qualified enough. I have a degree from the University of Michigan and another one from the University of Southern California, both in music. So Southern California is my bachelor's, University of Michigan is my master's. Actually, that's one connection I have with Ian, because Ian also went to U of M, although we never actually met there.
No, which was crazy.
So what are your degrees in?
So I have a dual degree in voice performance and theater arts from the University of Michigan.
Fancy. And Ian and I met in 2015 when we both took jobs as principal vocal artists at Heartland Sings, which is a vocal production company here in Fort Wayne, Indiana. I was in that job for 3 years. Ian did it for about 5, and somehow we didn't get sick of each other.
I know.
So we're still friends. In the meantime, I've been teaching at the Purdue School of Music. I work with both classical and popular music students. And at this point, I've been teaching either privately or at a university for, since 2011.
Oh, wow.
I'm old.
Yeah.
How about you, Ian? How long have you been teaching?
So I started teaching, actually the first time I started teaching was when we got started with Heartland Sings. And so I did that for quite a while, about 5 years. And I took a little bit of a break because I started working at the Boys and Girls Club around here. But I live in South Bend, Indiana now. And I've just actually, as of January, just started my voice studio back up. So which has been very exciting to jump back into it again.
Yeah, so we've both got enough experience where we wanted to kind of give our opinions on some of these things, thought that it might help. So hopefully it'll help. Hopefully it doesn't make you more confused. And let's jump right into this. Ian, you ready?
Yeah, right. Let's do it.
Just kind of going through here. So if I don't answer your question, it's not because it wasn't a great question. It's just for the sake of time. Our first question that I wanted to address here is, what exactly does it mean to stay hydrated? And how does that affect your anatomy and your singing?
So I think for me, it's taken a lot of time. Yes, of course, drinking water is the important thing. But I've learned a couple of different things too about, staying hydrated. Like for one, something that's beneficial for me is, if you have a drink with electrolytes, because, obviously if you are, let's say, I have this coffee right here, has water in it, but it's caffeine, which dehydrates you. And so you can just drink water, but that takes time to process in your body. And so having the electrolyte powders or things like that will help replace that and help you feel more hydrated. Another thing I can think of is if you have any of those sort of misters or steam machines or things like that, those are can be super helpful, like before a performance, because the steam will just go directly down your throat into the larynx and onto the vocal cords directly. Whereas, again, if you're just drinking liquid, it still has to process through the body to rehydrate or moisten the cords. So those are a couple of ways I found about hydration.
That was a great point that I hadn't considered, that hydration doesn't necessarily mean ingesting. It can also be hydration in the air around you. So we all, I think, know that the body is about 70% water, and your vocal cords are coated with mucous membrane, which is the same stuff that's on the inside of your cheek. So if you think about how the inside of your cheek would feel if it was dry, I think we've all been there. Like maybe you had a rough night and you wake up the next morning, your mouth is super dry. If your vocal cords are in that kind of state, which they often are, especially first thing in the morning, they're not going to function properly. They're not going to have the elasticity that they need in order to work well. So one tip I have for hydration, certainly you do want to be staying hydrated, drinking water throughout your day. I start every morning by drinking like a huge glass of water because overnight you will get dehydrated. So it's really important to hydrate first thing in the morning, especially if you're going to be performing or doing any singing in the morning. Do you do that too?
Yeah, I try to make sure that, that I always have like some water even before, like if I get in the morning before I brush my teeth or anything like that, I make sure to have some water just so that I'm good for the day.
Yeah. And then what you said about hydration in the air. If you live in a cold climate, experts recommend that you keep your living space between 40 to 60% hydration in the air. So usually I've got little monitors all over my house that gauge the humidity. And when that humidity dips around 42, 41%, I bust out the humidifiers and get the air around 50%. I find that makes an enormous difference in the way that I feel. Even if I'm going out into environments where I don't have as much control, I'm not going to tote a humidifier around with me wherever I go. But if I'm sleeping in and mostly in an environment that is a little bit more humid, I feel better throughout the winter. I don't get that fatigue, that dry throat feeling that comes along with humidity. Are you sensitive to that too? I don't know if it seems like a lot of my students suffer from that issue as well.
Yeah. I mean, I would agree with that. I mean, I'm just during the winter. Yeah. I mean, it's just drier. And so, you generally have to, even though it's not as obvious as summer where you're sweating, like you still have to make sure you're just hydrating just as much because of, as you said, it's drying you out entirely. So, do
you have a humidifier? You do, don't you?
I actually don't have a humidifier.
If you don't have a humidifier and it's not in your budget right now, one easy way that you can humidify your home is by boiling some water on the stove. One thing I like to do in the winter is actually drop a little bit of essential oil or even just a cinnamon stick or something in there, and it makes your house smell really nice too. All right. Anything else to say on that?
I think that's it. Yeah. I think it's just important just to stay hydrated. I mean, even if just you're not singing that day, just in general, because that, actually, if you were able to get those big water bottles and that have those measuring points and things like that, if you just drink all of that probably will cover you for the day. You just don't have to obsess over it. Just like there's a point of drinking too much water.
That's a really good point. So if you drink way too much water because you're nervous before a performance, you're then going to just have to pee, which is not going to help with the nerves situation. So you can overdo it, but as long as you are drinking an appropriate amount of water and staying hydrated, definitely take water to your voice lessons and have some available if you're at rehearsals and other spaces like that.
Also be aware of the tea that you're drinking, recognizing that black and green tea both have caffeine in it. So that just one of those things that could potentially dry you out, just being aware of it. But, and tea is very helpful if you have, honey or things like that. But I mean, still at the end of the day, water.
I know we're taking a really long time on this question, but I just learned something really crazy about licorice root. So licorice root is a really common ingredient in teas that target the throat, like throat coat tea, because it's naturally sweet and it provides kind of a barrier, or it feels like it does. I just learned that licorice tea contains a natural ingredient. It starts with a G and it has a bunch of Y's in it, and I don't know how to pronounce it. I can stick it in the notes, but apparently if you ingest too much of it, it can cause heart failure. So don't overdo it with the licorice tea. Wow. I'm definitely guilty of this. It can heighten your blood pressure and cause all kinds of problems. So just throwing that out there, like even if something is good, everything in moderation, right? Yeah. Don't give yourself a heart attack.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on. So this is kind of the opposite of the question we just had. I definitely struggle with spit management. So this person is asking for some tips on what to do about spit sloshing around when they're singing. Have you ever had this issue?
I mean, I think there's been, there are definitely times I know when we have performed together or things like that when we were with Heartland Sings. There, I think particularly when we were doing a cappella stuff, and if there was like, as you know, I would be singing bass, and a lot of the time, and maybe if it's like a jazz piece, I'm doing the bass line, and there's not a lot of breaks in that music. So there's a lot of times where I would just be like, and because I didn't have a chance to swallow. I mean, I don't know, as far as that goes, it's just like I just swallow your spit and then come back into it, move on. I don't know.
I remember a voice teacher a while ago telling me a horror story about somebody who was singing an aria, of course, classical music, and there was nowhere to, like, no breaks. And so they weren't able to kind of regulate that. It ended up just drooling during their song. So sometimes if you're singing something that's like really fast and you don't have a lot of breaks to breathe, spit management is definitely a real issue. Mm-hmm. So whoever asked this question, you are not alone. Thank you for asking this question. I think a big part of managing that is planning your breaths, actually. Because if you plan your breaths, you can capitalize on all of your available time when you're not singing, and you can find somewhere where you can get a gulp down and just manage the situation so it doesn't get out of hand. Yeah.
And communicate, whoever, I mean, if it's with an accompanist, or if you're singing in front of an orchestra, or even if you're just singing like with a band or things like that, communicate with the people who are backing you what your tempo is, like what your thing. It's very important for you to state that, and so that you're setting that boundary. And so you don't have to worry about drooling all over the place. And I think that's always a tricky thing, because people get kind of nervous, but it's important to say for sure, especially if you're, because singing is a very different mindset. It's just a different thing that's going on. It's in your body. So sometimes people who don't normally sing might not just be aware of that. So it's very important for you to communicate. If you've got
someone like with a non-wind instrument who isn't reliant on breaths, especially, you might have to do some advocating for yourself there. That's a good point.
Yeah, and it makes the experience better for everybody.
One more thing about that you can do as you're planning out your song, tempo-wise, it's okay to clip off the ends of a note so you have more time to breathe. So for example, if you have a sustained note, you can cut off the end of the note early, get that breath in, swallow, and then come in at the correct time. You can't come in late because that's going to affect the tempo of the piece, but you can always cut off early if you need to. So if you feel that things are going down, just cut off that note early, swallow, and then come in for your next entrance and look like you meant to do all of it, and the audience will never notice. Yeah. It's amazing what you can get away with if you don't make a face.
Yeah. And it's also like when you're performing your song, it's your song. You don't have to sing it like the famous person over here or this recording. Like, just entirely make it your own so you are happier. So you're not frustrated about like, oh, now I'm a drool coming down. What do I do? Just advocate for yourself.
Yeah, do what you have to do to enjoy your performance and not have an emergency situation. Yes. All right. So going on to our next question. This is a good one for you, Ian, because I personally still have difficulty talking about this one. Formant tuning and covering for male singers. So is this something that you use at all in your singing?
I think it's a very complex question. I think it really just depends on the voice type, on how a person is just built as a human being. So covering something particularly for, baritones or bass baritones, or I guess basses as well, as there's just a point where we get the higher part of our register, probably, the break passaggio for most people is like, E4, F4. And so
the worst.
Yeah. And so at that point, there's a point where the vowels start to shift and it's become less pure. So let's say if I'm singing E, if I'm high in my voice, like singing a high G, I'm not going to go E because I'm going to feel stuck. So I kind of have to shift it and make it sort of like an I sound on the inside and really just round my mouth if I'm singing, classically. And it's a way of being able to, open, keep the throat open, keep the space open back there, but then still focus the resonance and the point in your sound and carry. But it really just depends. I think it just depends on the singer, depends on, where the sweet spot is. I would just say as far as covering, I would say just work the teacher. It's kind of a complicated, and it just depends sort of thing, because everybody's voices are different. For, what's going to work for me is going to work completely different for the other singer. Like it just depends.
Yeah. So the theory behind formant tuning and covering for male singers is that it all gets into the science of sound and the way that sound waves interact with the vocal tract. Mm-hmm. So you can get real nitty gritty here. But basically, some people think that if you round your vowel and create a longer vocal tract by extending your lips a little bit in certain parts of the voice, it can create a more acoustically friendly space for that register change, if that makes sense. I don't think that that's untrue, and I think that there's some validity to that, but I also think that it's easy to think that, oh, this is the answer, and forget to do the basic tenets of singing, of breathing well, relaxing the vocal tract, and having everything loose, having your soft palate up, all the things that you really need to sing well in that. So I would say that covering is probably the last thing that you want to think about here. First, make sure that that basic process is happening well. And once that's happening well, this might be something that you experiment with to smooth out that final process. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think too, also important, the point of, of rounding the lips and everything is, if we think of registers and there's chest and head register, is rounding the lips and everything like that is supposed to invite, more head register in. And particularly for, I'd say for lower male voices, if you haven't really sung your head voice, let's say your Mickey Mouse voice, woo, woo, if you're not used to doing that, then covering's not really going to make any difference. It can make the sound more swallowed and tense. So it really is something, I would agree, the last portion, and to go over with a teacher, because it's going to vary based on the person, and you have to be able to navigate that nuance of, where does this E vowel go here versus the A vowel, and how do I blend them? It's a complicated process. So it's very important to have someone to work with you on that, so they can help you find your way of doing it. So you're not trying to imitate what Bryn Terfel does, because he's an entirely different singer.
You never know. Bryn Terfel might be watching this. Hi, Bryn. Hey. But yeah, that's a good point. I'm glad to have you here to talk about that, because obviously I don't have that kind of instrument. The last thing that I would say on that is that a longer vocal tract caused by a closed vowel is often friendlier for register change areas, in the same way that semi-occluded vocal tract exercises make it easier to sing in different parts of your range for people, and are often used in vocal therapy, right? So that's just basically a fancy term for singing through a straw or doing a lip trill, anything that really elongates the vocal tract. So my advice to you, if you're having trouble in a specific part of your voice, especially with register changes, is find the sound or the vowel that works best for you and just practice on that. And then as that gets easier, introduce the phonemes that are maybe naturally more difficult for you, but use that easy one as a baseline to help you to smooth out that register change.
And volume is very important as well. So especially if you're doing a straw exercise, it's important to remember, I'm as I've learned, it's just sing quieter, and that's really what's going to help that up, because the louder you sing, the more breath pressure you're putting into the sound. And that's particularly, I would say, a lot happens with larger voices. It's the idea of we got to make the sound loud, especially if you're singing acoustically. But the idea is, is really focusing on singing quieter. And especially if you're in head voice and you work through all the cracky stuff, a lot of that's going to feel easier, because you're allowing yourself to just use your voice in a more efficient way.
I do think that can be really valuable for registration changes. I have pretty mixed feelings about volume, especially in a choral setting, as you know. Yeah. But specifically for working through register changes and just making sure you're not banging on it, basically, right? Yeah,
because it's about, because really, at the end of it's part of it, is, sort of the warmth of the voice and the body of it. But there's also, I mentioned earlier, the point or the strength that it's the high frequencies that are also going to carry the sound. So if if you're going, things like that, especially if you sing into a microphone, the mic is going to pick up all of that. So it makes it a lot easier to navigate that, but you have to put the work in first and be comfortable with the weird.
Yeah, it's not all gonna sound good. I mean, you probably know that if you're practicing singing, right? Because we don't have to practice the things we sound great on. We have to practice the things that don't sound also great.
Yeah. And after a while, and then if you do it enough times, then your voice will just adapt to it, and then it'll be like, oh wow, how did this?
Well, as long as you're not doing anything unhealthy.
Yes.
Because if you're practicing in an unhealthy way, you're just going to hurt yourself and not really get anywhere. But that's a different story. I hope that kind of helps you a little bit. So the biggest takeaways I would say are that focus on good vocal production first, using covering and formant work as an aid to get through that specific register area after you've put in the foundational work, and then thinking about that semi-occluded vocal tract theory part of covering, right?
Yeah. And for any male singers or male presenting, just remember, just like head voice is an option. You do have that. Please work with it. Yeah.
Good point. Head voice is important. Okay. Next question. Okay. Let's go. This is a funny question. How would you personally describe the feeling of a raised soft palate? I love this question.
I mean, it was actually until I was first met you that we started having that conversation. And it took me a while to figure that out. I don't know.
Do you want me to talk about it first?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
So there's two physical sensations that I think really come with a raised soft palate for me. The first one is the total cut off inability to breathe through my nose. So when my soft palate is up, my soft palate's up right now. You probably notice it sounds like I have a cold, but unless I'm saying a nasal or trying to say a nasal consonant, you don't really notice the difference. When my soft palate is in this position, I can feel that my nose is like a no-go zone. Like I cannot breathe through my nose, almost like I have a head cold and my nose is just closed up. We all know that feeling. It stinks. But when you're singing, you do want to have that feeling. The other sensation that I have, because the soft palate has several muscles that raise it up, I have a sensation of work where the soft palate is, and I almost feel like a dome stretch sensation in the back of my mouth. So those are the two biggest things that I feel. Do either of those resonate for you, Ian, or do you have a different one?
Yeah, I mean, I think at first I didn't. Now I have more awareness of it. I think for me, it's probably the easiest way to think about it is like breathing through your nose versus breathing through your mouth. It's like when you take a breath through the nose, you're breathing in air, and your soft palate's lowered so that that the air travels down into the lungs. With your mouth, you have the ability to raise your soft palate. And that's where I think that's what helped me kind of start to become more aware of it.
Yeah. So just to show you, I really wish this thing moved, but this is the soft palate right here. And if I could show you, I should talk into this. This is the soft palate right here. And if this moved, I could show you that when it goes up, it cuts off that nasal pharynx from the rest of the pharynx.
It does not make that sound, though.
That is the sound of a raised soft palate. But it effectively seals off the airways of the nose from the rest of your airway. So you can see that when that thing is up, you're not breathing through your nose. And that's kind of the sensation that you're looking for back there. I hope that helps. Okay, next up, let's see. Okay, this is a great question, Ian. I think this one's good for you because Yes, I think this is a good one for you.
Okay.
How can I accept my own voice and make the best of the abilities I have?
Oh, well, the first thing is you have to record yourself and listen to yourself sing. I know it's a very vulnerable thing because especially you have to consider the way our eardrums are placed in our head and in our skulls. It affects how we hear ourselves. So we hear ourselves a certain way, but what everybody else hears is something completely different. And so when you listen to a recording, you're hearing what everybody else is actually doing. I think actually I saw some sort of video where I guess if you could go like this, You can start to hear how you sound in reality. And so I think that's just starting there. Being able to accept it. And
do you like listening to yourself, Ian?
Oh, I'm used to it at this point. Yeah, like, and it helps me a lot.
I still hate it.
Yeah, especially when I think, about, I listen to songs that, as I grow my journey, understand my voice more, I go back to songs which at the time I was like, oh, I don't know if I did that great. And then I listened to it. I was like, oh yeah, I was doing that. This is there. I'm just now more aware of how I can produce the sound or whatever. So it's very important to start there. And I mean, you can just, maybe if it's just in your room on your own time, just do a little bit at a time to start accepting it. But that's one of the things that's absolutely crucial, is being able to listen to yourself, because it's your voice, nobody else's.
Yeah, I think that's a really smart point. I think the thing is, you could erase voice in this question and replace it with anything else. And I think this is like a bigger question about confidence and self-acceptance, because as human beings, we all get certain things. Like, we look a certain way and we're able to do certain things. We all have different personalities and we all have a different voice. And so we all have things, I'm sure, that we like about ourselves. And then we all have things that we wish that we could change. So I think a big part of accepting your own voice is kind of working on yourself so that you are more confident in your own skin, and you feel supported and safe to explore yourself, including your voice. I've definitely worked with quite a few students at this point who have mental conditions that make this especially difficult for them. And they've told me all kinds of steps that they've taken, from journaling to giving themselves pep talks, certainly talking to therapists. Sometimes it even goes as far as taking medication if that's something that you need. But I think this is actually part of a much wider picture for me. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing about singing. It's the instruments in your body. And so it can be a very vulnerable thing. So it is important on that mental health aspect to, being able to do that self-care. And if you need to see someone, definitely go and see that person so that you can start to accept yourself. I would definitely say also, particularly in American culture, I would say, like, there's this idea of commercialized music, and now in the era of streaming, you can listen to all these different things and different recordings and different singers. However, it's important to remember you're not the singer. They are who they are, and they do their craft and they get paid to do it and everything like that. That doesn't mean you have to be like them. You can be inspired. You can definitely take choices that are similar to them, but recognize, if when you're choosing a song or you're doing the thing, it's important for it to feel good. For it to feel good for you in your voice, and two, not to hurt yourself. Because I know we work with, probably particularly, high school, especially, like, I was a kid who loved musical theater, especially the modern era musicals, which are more rock based.
And I started as a belter too, and I landed in vocal therapy as a result. Yeah,
and there are and I have judged at, particularly like competitions or show choir competitions where students will come and sing something that's completely inappropriate for them. One I think is, for example, is The Girl in 14G, which is written for Kristen Chenoweth, who was, she was like, when that song was written, maybe like 40s or...
She's also Kristen Chenoweth,
And this is written for a grown woman. So, like, I'm not expecting a 16-year-old to try and achieve all that, because they haven't developed that far yet. And that's normal. So it's important, if you're looking at that kind of stuff, be aware of what's going to feel good to you. And also have a teacher or someone to guide you in that process.
You've touched on the last point that I wanted to make with this question, because you ask how you can make the best of and celebrate your abilities. And the answer is to pick stuff that's flattering for you. So especially if you're planning for performance, even if that performance is just recording a video and putting it out on YouTube, or being brave enough to get up and sing at open mic night or karaoke night. Pick something that you know that you will be able to sing consistently, even on a day that's not your best. Like even if your allergies are flaring up, or you've just had a good cry or something, like this should be something that you can just generate. It shouldn't be something that's a huge reach and extremely difficult that you can only like hit that high note 50% of the time, because if you do that, you are not going to feel great walking into that performance. So celebrate your abilities, pick something that you feel really good singing right now that you can sing anytime, and then just enjoy singing it.
Yeah, because that way you're not because if you're doing the reach song, most of the time we're thinking about, okay, am I going to hit the note? Am I going to hit the note? Am I going to hit the note? And probably as a result, probably not, because we're thinking about it and now our body tenses as a result of the anxiety or the fear. So just, pick that song that's really good, and then you just sing it and perform it. And that's part of the magic, is like, it's about how you sing it, how you emote it. And that's what's going to bring the audience in.
Yeah, definitely. You got to get closer to your microphone, Ian. Can you say something?
Hello? Hello? Hello?
I think that's a little better. Okay. Next question. Okay. So this is a really good question. Does anyone agree on how to know what someone's voice type is? I recently convinced myself that there's no need to know, as nobody seems to agree anyway. I'm actually inclined to agree with the writer here for the most part. I think that unless you are in musical theater or classical music, if you're in contemporary music, like you're just singing pop or rock or whatever, you don't really, like, fach is not important. You know, you sing what feels comfortable for you. If you know your vocal range, you know where your breaks are, and you can work around that stuff. It doesn't really matter, especially because voice type is not as cut and dry as people think it is. So for example, I'm a soprano, and a lot of high sopranos have incredibly wide ranges. So even though I'm a soprano, when I sing popular music, I often sing into octave 2. And that's not a mistake. I do actually mean that. So that's not something that on paper a soprano should be able to do. But what's on paper, if you're in contemporary music, can kind of put you in a box. So if you're in musical theater or you're in classical music, I'm assuming you're working with a teacher or a coach or a team who can kind of help you figure out your voice type. But if you're just in popular music, honestly, who cares? Just sing what feels good and sing what is in your comfortable range right now.
I do have to say, I mean, there is something to note about, the era of popular music that we've been in for the last several decades, particularly as a lower voiced male, there is a struggle. Like the age of like it was like Nat King Cole and the lower, the more so those crooner kind of stuff. It sort of kind of changed with the Beatles. And how rock music came into the scene. And so now it's just what is appealing to the popular culture is high. It's high singing.
I thought you were going to sing Locked Out of Heaven for us.
No, definitely not. But the thing with that is like, because I think that gets tricky for me when it comes to like karaoke and things like that, because unless someone knows like, hey, if there's a different key, on YouTube or things like that, sometimes that gets tricky. I know for me personally, I'm starting to explore my head voice more and things like that. I've learned there's a little bit more than I thought I could do. In certain songs, certain things I can do, because with a lot of that, it's a lot of mixing. It's a lot of things like that. And especially if you're singing popular music, you have the microphone. You don't have to sing acoustically. So there's a lot of work. There's a lot of things the microphone can do that takes a lot of pressure off of you.
That's definitely true. And that is a good point. I do think that for guys, like if you're not a tenor and it's not comfortable for you to be squeaking out those high notes, don't do it. Pick something that works for you, but also don't let what you think your voice type is like limit you to a certain range. And that's kind of why I said what I said about where I sing. So if you think of a soprano key for most songs, it's going to be a higher key. But for example, if I'm singing like jazz, sometimes I want to do things in a really low key and they sound good there and they feel comfortable there. So why not? So explore your full range of abilities, regardless of what you think your voice type is. And just don't worry about it too much, unless you're in classical music. And then you're going to have people who will help you figure it out.
Yeah. And make sure, also make sure you're honoring the style. Because there are times, I mean, even in the classical world where, there's the idea of like, if you can sing classical music, you can sing everything. And that is not true at all. Because styles are styles for a reason. Now, surely they can cross over, but it's important to recognize this is opera and this is jazz. It's not going to sound like a jazz song. Usually if you have a ton of vibrato and you're it's not really going to sound like the way
that sounds great.
But it's important to do that and honor that. Something actually too, with singing higher and things like that. Actually, one of my students actually came up with like a head voice playlist. So he practiced. So it helps him kind of practice in his head voice.
Is it like male falsetto-y kind of head voice?
Yeah, falsetto.
Okay.
Yeah,
like Justin
falsetto.
Timberlake and that kind of stuff.
I don't know specifically that kind of, but you could think of something like that, or Frank Ocean, or things like that, because he plays guitar, and so we're working on.
Is that on Spotify? I would love to get my hands on that, actually.
I have to ask him. Like what he's doing.
Because I've been thinking about that a lot too, like singers who sing a lot in head voice in contemporary music, like Freddie Mercury, or like Childish Gambino now does a lot in head voice, I feel like. So there's plenty of it around if that's something you want to practice.
Yeah, like Frankie Valli in the Four Seasons, that's all they were doing. It was like, yeah, that's all they were doing to get the sound that they
that's true.
that they had. And that's great. And yeah, if you're first starting this out, it's going to sound weird. It might not sound strong. That's because you're just using muscles that you've just not really utilized that much before. But over time, it will get more powerful.
Your cricothyroids can get more coordinated as long as you remember to work them out. All right. Shall we?
Yeah.
Let's see. Ooh, okay. This is a statement, but I'll turn it into... Oh, no, it is a question. Okay. I just can't control my larynx. When I go for high notes... Above F4, it just comes up and I strain and swallow the notes. It's also bad if I have a long choir rehearsal or something, my throat will hurt. Is there any way I can sing these notes while keeping my larynx floating or neutral? Or have I just maxed out my range?
I mean... Well, the thing is, like, controlling my larynx, I mean, I would say the opposite. If we're thinking about control, then I would think the instinct is to tighten. Because it's trying to think of it as if it's like a machine that needs to go this button and this button and this button. Whereas, I mean, if I'm going to pick up my drink, I'm just on brain, pick up the drink. I'm not going, okay, now I'm going to take my hand and I'm going to take my hand over here, grab it right here, bring it to my mouth. No, it's just a natural response. And so with the voice, it's hard because we want to, it's a dual thing. We're learning the technique and we're learning all these things, but at the same time, the point of it is to condition ourselves to just move with freedom. So I'd probably say as far as control, I've been asked maybe just let go of the control and let whatever happens happen.
I agree with you partially. So I think maybe this was more of an issue of vocabulary. Like, it sounds like they're trying to relax their larynx to me, and it's just getting difficult, which, like, let's be real, that's a universal problem. I think we've all had issues with our larynx shooting up on high notes, right? I certainly have.
Yeah.
Have you? Yeah. So I think a big part of that for me, and again, this is just because I kind of teach in a way that's a little bit different, I think. The first part of that, I think, is learning to relax this whole area of your throat. Because I found that a lot of people, a lot of students come in, and even before they've made a sound, this whole area where the muscles that move the larynx are located is super tight. So there's a couple of things that you can do to help with that. You can massage your throat and your neck. You can actually move your larynx like this. Horizontally to loosen up those tendons around it. Swallowing helps to reset the larynx. So going into your singing session with a relaxed neck, I would say is the first step. Even before you've made a sound, if you can get that tension level down, things are going to go better once you start singing. As far as trying to keep your larynx in a neutral position when you're singing those notes, this is a twofold process and it's not going to happen overnight. But the first thing is to make sure you're supporting adequately. To me, I kind of think of laryngeal and honestly just vocal tract tension as almost like a misbehaving dog. So if you are not doing the work that you need to do as a singer, your dog is going to say, oh, you need help. I'm going to help you, and jump in and start barking and going crazy and get super tense. And then at that point, there's nothing you can do, right? It's a lost cause. So you have to make sure that you are supporting your sound from the breath. And once you do that, your vocal tract, including your larynx, is going to be more likely to cooperate with what you're trying to do. So assuming adequate breath support, you can actually, and not everybody's going to agree with this, but you can actually find your larynx and gently hold it in place as you sing. Now be careful with this. You do have to start with a relaxed neck and everything. So if you feel a lot of muscular activity, stop, massage, swallow, reset. Make sure you're supporting adequately, but you can hang on to that thing gently and prevent it from shooting up. And that will just help you to kinesthetically learn what it means, what it feels like, and what it sounds like to sing those notes without that laryngeal tension. So you can use that as a new baseline to develop new vocal habits. And that is the end of my TED Talk. Ian, do you have anything to add to that?
I mean, I agree with like the resetting. I mean, that is kind of the idea. That is the point of, the lessons is like, it is, different exercises and things like that to help, allow your sound be its full beauty. And so, it takes a little bit of work, and resetting to be sure this is all loose and everything. And it's just to build habits. It's like I often compare it as to working out, lifting,
100%.
weightlifting.
It's so much like working out.
And so it's like, I mean, you're not going to go, if you're going to go to the gym for the first time, you're not going to go up to bench press 100 pounds like that. You're going to seriously injure yourself. And so it takes a lot of patience and work and things like that. And so, the important thing is, if you feel that's like, I'm tense. Okay. If you can, stop singing, reset, and then try again. I would say particularly for choir, because it's tricky with choir. When the teacher or the conductor is speaking, they're speaking to everyone, and they're thinking about the overall sound, and generally often tend to just generally speak. And so it's important to recognize, when you're with a group, you're singing with other people. So you have the ability to stop, take a break if you're feeling tense, and then just kind of reset. So I wouldn't, if you're worrying about like, is it loud enough? Is it everything like that? Or if you are a person who has a louder voice, and a lot of people might rely on you. Sure. I mean, I can understand the pressure of that, but I wouldn't put too much on yourself to try and make sure that you're carrying everything. It's a choir for a reason. It's not, you are not the sole thing. It's not like a small a cappella group like Pentatonics.
One thing to add on to that, I'm not sure if the person who asked this question is in high school, what kind of choir you're involved in, but make sure that you're singing the right voice part. Because if you're feeling like a constant laryngeal raised situation, it could be that maybe you need to take one step down. And you could even go back up once your technique has improved a little bit. But if you're really struggling, don't be afraid to talk to your choir director, because they're on your side. They don't want you to be in pain with a raised larynx during rehearsals. Yeah.
And lightly singing when you're in rehearsals and things like that. And you're just, you have the ability to just like, if you're singing, you're running something over and over again, take some time to mark. That's a term that's used, just being able to sing, but, not putting too much pressure on.
I gotta just say though, if you're a soprano and you're singing above the staff,
then it's gonna be loud.
Just do what you gotta do, girls.
Be
Don't worry about marking if it stinks. Like, just don't do it.
Yeah.
Do what's right for you. Okay, thank you for that question. That was a fun one. Do you have some time to answer a couple more?
Sure.
Okay, let's see. Ooh, this is a fun one. How do I howl the distorted way many old soul legends do in a sustainable way? Like Ray Charles, Etta James, Big Mama Thornton, staple singers, Aretha Franklin, Jesus, James Brown, etc.
Yeah, I'm still very like early on this journey. I did the most recent education I got was with the Lovetri Institute of Somatic Voice Work. It's out of Baldwin Wallace College. And Jeannie Lovetri, who created the method, her standpoint is coming from the idea of what she terms contemporary commercial music. And so part of this last course, there was someone who did a whole thing on it. And it's still a very new thing that people are researching into. For a long time, it just wasn't, there was no like efforts in vocal science on like trying to figure out what that was about. But I think the biggest thing is, there's a various amount of different things. I think for some of people like James Brown, there is there's the growl, there is that
beautiful
that sound, yeah, that they might use. That is a little bit harsher. I did learn that for one way is the use of vocal fry in head voice. That is this, yeah,
that was whistle tone.
Yeah, that actually, that's back to head voice again. That is actually something people use as a possible technique. But a lot of it also goes into like microphone. A lot of the technology and stuff like that, allowed that kind of thing. But but those kind of vocal methods and things like that have gone back. That's like, like hundreds of or thousands of years. If you think of more some of the more Eastern cultures and things like that, people have just been doing that, and it's just a thing that they do. So, if you were able to find a teacher who, actually understands this, that's very recommended. I personally have not delved into it because I myself haven't explored in my own voice, and I think that's what's important. So it's doable. It's just like you just have to be sure you have someone there to help you with it, because that stuff can get very tiring. Even for heavy metal, that kind of sound.
I'm worried about the microphone.
Yeah. That is a lot of eating the microphone and sound engineering and things like that to do that. But that's not sustainable at all. You can only do it for a certain time period.
Okay, so I have some thoughts on this. And I also remember you talking about a really interesting, there was like a stroboscopy that you watched as a part of that course that showed some of what was happening with the false vocal folds and the pharyngeal area above the glottis, right? Which I thought that was really interesting. I saw some of that in, I bought the DVD, Zen of Screaming, and the interesting part of that was definitely the stroboscopy that she included, where she showed herself screaming and how, again, it's like false vocal folds and then like the whole top part of the pharynx over the vocal cords. So not the vocal cords themselves were constricting to form that kind of scream sound. So I would say you're asking about extended technique, basically. When you're doing extended technique, the first step is to get a solid foundation, right? So if you are breathing well and your vocal tract area is nice and relaxed and your soft palate is up, then you can play with extended technique. If those pieces aren't in place, you might hurt yourself even without playing with extended technique. So wait until you feel like you're ready technically and you've got some stamina. My golden rule is if it hurts, don't do it. Yeah. That is so important when you are experimenting with extended technique. So if it feels itchy or uncomfortable or you feel actual pain, please stop. I'm going to turn that down a little. I'm getting excited here. So I do have like 3 little things that I've been experimenting with myself that might help you to get kind of a distorted sound. The first one, as far as like that old school kind of howl sound, is again, based on the stroboscopies I've seen, trying to constrict the pharynx above the laryngopharynx. So oropharynx area above here, so you don't end up feeling that in the larynx, might be a way to get that. I also have this theory, I don't have evidence of this, that rattles your spit around in the back a little bit to kind of create that kind of a sound, which you can capitalize then on to create growl, etc. Like that doesn't feel uncomfortable to me. I think I could do that for a while. Definitely glottal fry is something that you can experiment with to get that kind of sound. And then finally, when you're in upper registers, usually we think about register changes as a negative in singing. I find that when you're thinking about extended technique, you want a little bit of like a crackle or a growl or kind of like a spicy kind of feel. If you lean into the register change instead, you can find that cracky spot and kind of do that on purpose in a way that sounds like growl. That's something that I do a lot in my high mix belts. So when I'm at like E5, F5, G5 area, and it makes a really impactful like wail sound. You've heard me do this. And it sounds very rock and roll, but it doesn't cost me anything. So just play with some of that. You can play with other things too. Just follow the golden rule and make sure that your foundational techniques are in place first.
And also too, say that if you're in a band and things like that, and we discussed like setting boundaries earlier, that might be one of the things, because there's the idea, you say, for example, the drummer is like, if you're really into it and just playing on the drums and everybody, or everybody's just, playing loudly, that's fine. But also just remember, like for you, to just be able to have that boundary for yourself, because, sometimes the impulse can be, everybody's playing out. Now I have to sing louder. And that's where we can get into issues and can get into potential damage, of your voice. So it's just really important to, make sure that, that's being communicated and clear, especially when it comes to these extended techniques. Something that made me think of is, I know we are always afraid of things like that, but yodeling is a thing. People have been doing it for a very long time. So if there's many different things you can do with the voice, and sometimes just be comfortable if what might feel or mentally or emotionally uncomfortable. Just as long as, we're not, if it hurts, don't do it.
Yes. Follow the golden rule, folks. All right. I think we got time for one more.
Okay.
Okay, we've got a register question. What are vocal registers, and is the mechanical function of the male head voice and falsetto meaningfully different? How do each of these registers relate, if at all, to female head voice? I've heard so many different explanations of this from acoustic, muscular, functional, and other perspectives, and have never really gotten a clear answer. Bonus, does mixed voice meaningfully exist for either male or female voices? If it's okay, Ian, I'd like to talk about anatomy first.
Oh, I was totally going to defer it to you to start on that point.
Great. So, you mentioned that you have kind of heard about this from a muscular and functional perspective, and registers, you're right, are very controversial. And if you talk to 10 different pedagogues about this, you are likely to get 10 different responses, which is why I like to focus on the concrete stuff, which is the body. So within the larynx, where register changes take place, we've got our vocal cords, and the vocal cords are pretty much controlled as far as pitch and register goes by two different sets of muscles. The vocal cords are the external part of the vocalis muscle, which is also known as the thyroarytenoid muscle. And that muscle shortens and thickens the vocal folds. And that muscle is responsible for chest voice. If you think about like a guitar, the thicker cords on the guitar are responsible for the lower notes. So chest voice is the lower part of your voice. If you put your hand on your chest when you are in chest voice, like I'm speaking in a chest dominant register right now, you feel a lot of chest resonance. That's why it's called chest voice. And chest voice is characterized by kind of a more robust tone. The contact between the cords is thicker, which causes that. Chest voice is also predominantly used in belting and by male classical singers.
Hello.
Like Ian. The other set of muscles is called the cricothyroids, and this set of muscles tilts the laryngeal cartilages in such a way that it thins and lengthens the vocal folds. So if you think about those skinny cords on the guitar, that's where we get the higher, lighter portion of our voice called head voice. So the contact between the cords there is thinner. You've got a longer, thinner cord. So it's got like a lighter, some people say flutier tone that goes up to the top of the voice. Female opera singers sing predominantly in head voice. And there's just these two sets of muscles. So all of the registers that you're talking about here are either cricothyroid dominant head voice, thyroretinoid dominant, chest voice, or mixed, somewhere in between where both muscles are functioning simultaneously to do different things to the vocal folds. That's why terms like falsetto, which some people are like really interested in the difference between falsetto and head voice. And there is a technical difference, like it's a slightly thinner contact, but when it comes down to it, they are both cricothyroid functional vocal registers. Do you want to jump in at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I've said, and falsetto, it's a term that's been used for like centuries and things like that. That was sort of like, it was like false, is like the Italian translation is like,
it's not like the false vocal folds, though.
No, not false vocal folds, but just like it's like it's like a false voice or something. Or if that's what was the term used at the time.
Yeah, it's just a lighter head voice register, basically.
Yeah, and I think probably at that time it was just that idea because men were not typically singing up in head voice or things like that as much as particularly as women were. So I think that's kind of where that sort of idea came from. But
unless you were a castrato, but different story there.
But yeah, I mean, that's again, it's just a very sort of nitty gritty details. But I mean, as far as it goes, what Elena said, that is physically what's happening. That's what's going on. So I wouldn't worry so much about all the specifics or things like that. Or am I head voice or am I in chest voice? Unless you're specifically like working on that technique wise with, a teacher or working on that yourself. As far as mix, that's more of a contemporary term. For a long time, something like that was never even spoken of.
Although mix is used all the time in classical music, especially I think by tenors.
Yeah. I think particularly in
and mezzos.
Yeah, I think particularly in the Broadway scene, that's where that was started becoming more of a thing, especially in more modern musicals. Like say Hair, when Hair came out in the 60s, that was sort of the rock era. And so that's where you started to get more about specific of that idea of mix and things like that. I think when the approach that I do is just, I don't tell my students, I mentioned it, but I started to be very careful about how I go about it because
mix.
Yeah, but as far as like using the term, like I reference it, but I try to focus on just separating the registers. This is clearly chest voice. This is clearly head voice, and focusing on strengthening the both of those independently, and then having the student focus on that, because I feel that sometimes it can get a little overwhelming, because when you're singing, there's a lot of different stuff happening at the same time. And so I know for me, it's like where I would get stuck on, okay, where's my tongue out right here? Am I breathing correctly? And that's a lot going on, for something like if you're just swallowing food, you just swallow food. We don't specifically get into all of that. So I think it's important to really just try and focus on, one thing at a time when you're approaching these registers, because over time, some of this stuff will kind of it may just happen on its own.
As somebody with a very naturally segmented voice, I do have to advocate for developing mixed voice specifically. I do agree, though, and actually, I think in the US in particular, most students that we get have a stronger chest voice than head voice, because most people talk in lower voices here in the States. It's just kind of standard. And so strengthening that head voice, and especially lower head voice, is going to help you with your mix if you are trying to get rid of the dreaded crack. But it will also help you with register isolation if that's your goal.
Yeah.
And I definitely agree with what you said about isolating the different body parts. That's a big part of like what I'm focusing on in my course, is because it can get so overwhelming and confusing. If we address these issues one at a time and spend a significant amount of time on just one thing, you can get that one thing to the point where it's behaving well enough where it's not going to be such a huge impediment to the rest of the vocal apparatus.
Yeah. And that's not to say you won't ever be mixing. Like when I'm teaching, I'm saying don't mix. Like, no, it's something that will happen. I just don't spend so much time of like, and now we're mixing and now we're doing, I'm like, let's just make it simple, focus on one thing at a time. And over time, you will start to develop that awareness yourself.
And neither of us is wrong. This is just like different teachers have different ways of going about doing things. I'm a lot more specific with when I'm asking for mix, especially if I get a student with a really segmented voice who has to work on that. But All right. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, everybody.
Ian, where can people find you if they want to know more about you?
So I'm still working on building my studio, but I have a Facebook page, Ian Michael Williams. That's sort of my artist page. In the process of trying to figure out a website and things like that. But if you want to email me, my email is M as in Michael, WILL 2014 @gmail.com, which is I am Will.
Very extra.
2014 @gmail.com. I am Will 2014 @gmail.com.
All right, that's all we've got for you today. If we didn't get to your question, I'm really sorry. We might try to do this again. It was kind of fun. Maybe we could do it remotely next time.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
Yeah, because you've got it set up where you won't be using my dynamic mic to do this at home. Thank you so much for all of your questions if you contributed, and happy singing to all of you.
Thank you, everybody.